Hey, so today we're talking about speech sounds and moving beyond words. So if you visited or rewatched last week we were focused more on sounds and words, and today we're talking more about getting that more into conversation. So getting into phrases and sentences and our end goal of conversation. So again, for today, we'll just go over a bit of the agenda so you can kind of be prepared for the topics we'll be covering. We'll just do a very brief introduction. We'll very briefly review some definitions that we talked about last week, as well as add a couple new ones. We'll talk about the steps for working on speech. So I kind of talked last week about that pyramid. So we'll just review that a little bit more and get into a bit more detail on that. We'll talk about when to move on. So maybe you've started some practice, or maybe you're not sure where to start, or so we'll give some guidelines around when to move on, what to look for, how to know if your child's ready for that next step. We'll also review some of those activities for practice. So last week we spent quite a bit of time going over all the different types of activities that you could use for speech practice. So again, today will be more of a review and kind of how to adapt that to some of those higher levels. We'll spend a bit of time practicing or talking about practice at those different levels. We'll end off with some tips about generalization and leaving some time for questions. So again, my name is Desiree Brown. I'm a speech language pathologist with Sturgeon Public Schools. And I'm guessing if you're joining me that you have a child that's attending some programming or needs some support with those speech sounds. So for those definitions, back to definitions. Again, just a reminder that today we're talking about speech, which is to do with the sounds that we produce, which is different from language. So that's more to do with the words that we use in terms of like sentences and grammar and telling stories and that type of thing. So today we are focused on the sounds, with the end goal being intelligible speech or being clear and easy to understand to others. And the new one for today is generalization. So that's using accurate speech sounds in everyday conversations and everyday activities. So that is the end goal. Again, I'll just kind of quickly review this. If your child is working on some of these sounds, we're going to work on getting those sounds into conversation. It's great if they can say it by themselves or in words, but in order to kind of check these off and say that they're achieved, we want to be hearing them in their conversation and in their play and just throughout the day in whatever that they're doing. All right, so again, this kind of goes over how we learn different sounds. So if we look at the base of the pyramid there, we have awareness. And then that generalization, there's a whole bunch of steps, and then generalization is the last one. So when you're thinking about awareness, that's the ability of your child to just hear the sound. Can they hear when they produce it correctly? Can they hear the difference between when you say it correctly or incorrectly? Can they be aware, like in themselves, and hearing those differences? So that's our awareness. That's the base level. Sorry, I lost my tab here. There we go. So the next one is being able to say the sound by itself. So if they're working on that snake sound, can they just say S? From there, we'll progress into moving into syllables. So words like see or so. Sometimes syllables don't make sense, and sometimes sounds don't make sense either. But whenever we can, just a reminder to try and make those meaningful. So even though it is just a syllable, say we're working on Sue, maybe we give a stuffy the name Sue, and we're getting things that Sue might like. So try and be creative and make those words or those sounds meaningful if you can. Another one for F might be like Jack and the Beanstalk has that story, fee, fi, fo. So that's a good way to practice syllables as well. But yeah, whatever level you're working on, trying to make it meaningful and purposeful goes a long way into helping it be more generalized. Those meaningful words have so much more power, or not just words, phrases, sounds, syllables, whatever level it is, they have a lot more power than words that your child never uses or doesn't know or don't really have meaning or purpose to them. So trying to choose things that are meaningful or purposeful or that they'll actually use in their everyday speech is helpful for getting it into conversation. That way they can get a bit more practice, a bit more feedback. You can be modeling it throughout the day as opposed to a word that doesn't come up throughout the day. So just something to keep in mind. So back to our chart, from syllables, after they can say that accurately, you can move into words. From words, you might go into phrases. So those are maybe like 2 or 3 words together, like something like I want soap, or even adding a feature like a color or size like big, fork, or blue plate, whatever it is that you're working on, just adding something 1 word before to make it a short phrase. Then making a sentence, which is just a little bit of a longer phrase, so just adding a few more words to make it maybe 4 to 5 words. From there, moving up into paragraph. So again, a paragraph is just a few sentences put together, so putting together a couple sentences. From there, moving into structured conversation. So that's where you might pick a topic and add a bit of support in that conversation. And then finally getting into conversation and generalization, where they're just naturally using it in every day without you modeling or cueing. They're just doing it all on their own in all their activities throughout the day. So that's where we want to get to. So how do we know what level to work on? A good starting point, if you're not sure, is to check their IPP. If you're not sure where to find that, reach out to your school team and they can help you. But in there, usually in the beginning of the year, we'll write what they can currently do kind of in that current level of functioning. In the middle of the year, the updates will have, okay, now they're working on this sound and they can say this sound by itself, but they're working on this sound in sentences, or they're working on this sound in phrases. So you can kind of check that to get an idea of where to start. Or of course, you can always reach out to your SLP and ask kind of, hey, what can we work on? What are they doing now? What's a good part or a good place for us to start? And your SLP can definitely guide you in that. Another guideline, maybe you're practicing in the summer, or maybe you're moving into the upper grades and your child's still having a bit of difficulty and you're wanting to continue to practice at home. A good guideline is to continue to practice. Once they can practice with success about 80% of the time without you giving a lot of cues, then they can move on to the next goal or the next level of that. So say they can say their word 80% of the time correctly and you're not having to give many cues or reminders, then you can try maybe moving into phrases. And if they're still needing cues, you might try to maybe not give so many cues at that level. So maybe they're getting it right 80% of the time, but you're having to remind them each time to, use your snake sound before every turn. So maybe you want to fade out those cues first and then see if they can still be successful without cues. And then if they can, then maybe moving on to phrases. A good level for practice is around 60%. So we want your child to have success while still being a little bit challenged. That's that kind of good level for growth, but still getting some encouragement. So if they're at that 60%, you're going to be using cues to help them be successful, and then fading those cues as able while still letting them be successful and giving them lots and lots of praise. That's a really important one. Whenever they're doing it well or whenever they say it clearly, try to reinforce that by saying, oh, good job, you used your snake sound, or oh, wow, you kept your tongue behind your teeth, great job. And that praise goes a long way. Just going to back it up for a second to our pyramid. And something I forgot to mention is not all children need to go through each of these steps. So sometimes right away a child might come in and, oh, wow, they can already say their sound and they go straight into kind of skip the syllable level and they're able to say it in the words right away. I also find that for young children, especially, once you start practicing at that phrase level of 2 to 3 words, some of those younger, like 3-year-olds are using in their sentences and conversation, they're using about 2 to 3 words. So once you start practicing those phrases, sometimes with those young kids, it'll start to get into their conversation already just from that. So you can kind of skip a few of these depending on your child. And even some older kids, sometimes they might need a little bit more time because they're using really long sentences, telling these big, long stories. So even if they can say it in phrases, they might need a little bit more structured practice at the sentence and paragraph level before they're using it in their everyday speech and conversation. So I just wanted to put that out there that it does look like a lot of steps, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your child has to go through each of these steps. And you might need to spend more time at some of them than others, but again, it depends on your child. All right, so we talked about knowing what levels to work on. So now just a review of some activities. So there's all kinds of different activities you can use to practice these sounds, and as well as like in their words and phrases as well. So just like you can practice, like we talked about last time, practicing a sound during a daily routine, you can also extend that into maybe now you're practicing a sentence in those routines. So again, routines might include things like mealtime, helping with chores, maybe it's that car ride time that you do every day, or their bath time, bedtime, going to the playground. Those are all different routines that you can integrate that speech practice into. And if you're wanting some more ideas on like the specifics of these, you can go back and look at that at the previous speech sound presentation. As well, there's lots of different types of games that you can use to practice. So again, when you're working your way up to generalization, instead of just taking a turn saying a word, now you're taking a turn saying like a sentence or a phrase before getting that turn when you're playing soccer or playing a turn taking game, or before getting the pieces to your puzzle or craft or something like that. We also talked about games where you can use cards. So those could be cards that are printed from an online source, like mummyspeechtherapy.com is an example. So you can be printing speech cards and using them in these games, or you can use like actual like playing cards or a memory card game that you have. And again, the idea is to say a phrase or sentence when taking your turn. Nursery rhymes and songs and finger plays, we talked about last time a bit too, but they're also great for getting into those phrases and sentences. So many of them have the sound repeated throughout the sentence. The only difference for kind of that next step of phrase or sentence that you're working on is instead of pausing and waiting for them to fill in that word, now they're taking a longer turn and trying to fill in more of that sentence, or trying to fill in maybe at that paragraph level, a couple sentences. Maybe they're trying to do the whole thing with you. Again, just a reminder to practice slowly. We want them to be successful and be accurate and have that correct practice. So taking their time, as well as remembering to praise them when they are using that sound. And whenever you're practicing, remember, before you're even starting, to remind them, okay, we're going to be practicing your sound. Let's remember to do these things for that sound, so that they can be set up for success for their practice. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about some other ideas for practicing phrases. Like I mentioned before, a good way to practice phrases is to add one word to their target. So maybe you're adding like a word to do with color or size. Got a few games here. Like Pop-Up Pirate is a popular one. So instead of Katie, maybe they're working on S and they're getting her a sword, or they're going to stick it in, or they're calling it a stick. So maybe they get a red stick and then they get their red stick, or they get a blue stick and then they get their blue one. So just adding that one before. There's also kind of functional or short repetitive phrases that they can use throughout. Things like I see, I can, asking like can we or can I, saying something like I want, and then filling in their target, doing let's, and then their target, I have, or find something. So as you can see, some of these might have in those phrases words that they're practicing. So if that's the case, you can just use that as your practice, or some of them you'll be filling in the target word, and that's kind of what they're focused on saying accurately. Okay, so if we go back, our pyramid was there. So if we have awareness, sound, word, phrase, now we're into sentences. So we're kind of in that midway part in our pyramid. So again, you can do any of the activities we've already talked about, or you can practice making up a sentence, or get them to make up a sentence with their sound. And sometimes that can be the activity, depending on how you can kind of make it interesting or make it fun. Some examples might be like maybe you're playing telephone, and that's the game where one person says something, then they whisper it to the next person, and then they try to whisper it to the next person. So if you're playing telephone, okay, we're going to play this game. Remember to use your sounds, and like you've got to tell me a whole sentence using your sounds and try to say it really clear so I can understand you, so I can pass it on to the next person. So that can be a fun way to play at that sentence level. You can also practice like making up silly tongue twisters, and maybe they do their tongue twisters a few times a day. So that's where the sound is repeated a few times throughout the sentence. So that can be a challenge. Just a reminder too, to try and practice at the level that they can be successful with. So they might have to start saying it pretty slow off the start. And then once they get more successful, maybe then they can try and say it a little bit faster while still maintaining their clear speech sounds. Another idea for practicing at that sentence level might be to think of a secret code. So again, their secret code would have some words that has their target sound in it. And to think of a sentence that has a few words, or maybe just one target word that has their sound. But every time they go to do something, they have to say their secret code. So depending on your family, you can choose something that would work for you, but maybe it's every time they want a snack, they've got to tell you their secret code, or every time they need the remote, they have to tell you their secret code, or something like that. So again, it can be repeated throughout the day, and that's like their code for that activity. Once they get really good at it, you can think of another code to do. But yeah, you can be creative with practicing those sentences as well. All right, same with practicing paragraphs. Again, you can practice those same types of activities of routines or games to practice like a few sentences at a time. Or you could use like the act of making a paragraph be the activity. So again, a game like telephone, where now instead of saying one sentence, you're saying a couple sentences together. Tongue twisters, so instead of one sentence, you're making a bit of a longer sentence or a bit of a longer secret code. Other practice that's great for paragraphs is making up or retelling a story. That's also a great language building activity, but in terms of their speech sounds, the goal is to tell them again to focus on saying these speech sounds clearly while you tell me about this story. And it could have pictures in it that they're just kind of making up their own, or it could be a story you do together. Like sometimes it'll be a back and forth thing, like you can say, once upon a time, we went blah, 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 and then your child can fill in a few sentences, and kind of it can be a turn-taking thing, or they can tell the whole story by themselves. Also describing pictures in books, or looking at kind of silly, like what's wrong pictures. They can tell you about things that they notice in the picture using their clear sounds. Describing guessing games can be another good one. Sometimes it's like you could say something that you're thinking of and they could try to guess it, or they tell you what they're thinking of and you guess. But again, just taking turns saying a few sentences, like I'm thinking of something that is big and that holds your food and keeps it cold. And again, just trying to think of like getting them focused to say their sound while they're practicing those types of games. From paragraphs, we can move into structured conversation. Sometimes you can give this a name and we'll say, okay, it's time for like our careful talking time, or it's time for our, whatever you want to call it. Kind of giving it a fun name can make it more fun. But some families might have this like at a set time each day, and each day at a set time you have this 5-minute careful talking time, or you can just kind of integrate it throughout the day. But again, just reminding them that during that time you're going to be focused on listening to their sounds, and you want them to focus on saying their sounds clearly. And throughout that kind of careful talking time, you're also going to be modeling and emphasizing their target sound in your speech. So whether they say it correctly or not, you're still modeling it yourself and emphasizing it. If they do miss any sounds when they're saying it, just remember to respond to their message so they don't have to stop and say it correctly and continue. If they were telling you that they saw something, but they said, oh, I saw that, you could say something, oh, like, oh, yeah, you saw that. Wow, that was really cool that you saw that thing. I bet you really liked when you saw that. So just trying to repeat and emphasize it a few times. And they don't have to copy you, but that can just help to build that awareness and, oh yeah, saw, that's how it should sound. And then praising them whenever they are using it correctly. Like, wow, you told me that and it sounded so clear. Or, oh, I heard you say saw and you used your nice long sound. So giving them lots of praise. Sometimes families might get stuck on like, what do we talk about? So there's some conversation starter ideas. Things like would you rather questions are kind of fun. You can also kind of Google conversation starters for kids, and there's some fun ideas there. I did make, in the handout section, there's a couple of handouts that has ideas for each of these, so you can visit those for some starting point ideas. But again, just reminding of these points to kind of set it up and make those expectations clear before you start. And as you're going, you're modeling and praising them for when they do use it correctly. All right, so we're on to tips for generalization. So again, truly generalizing their sound is using it in all settings with all kinds of different people in all kinds of different activities. So they're really using it all the time in all situations. So to help get them there, you might want to consider changing one of those things up slightly. So for example, to help generalize, maybe you're always practicing in the same room at home. Maybe you just practice in a different room. Maybe instead of practicing inside, maybe you practice outside, or maybe you practice in the car, or maybe you visit the library and you practice while you're looking at a book at the library, or maybe while you're getting your groceries at the grocery store, then you're practicing saying some words clearly while you're at the store. So varying the environment or the setting can be one thing that can help them generalize. Another might be varying the practice person. So instead of practicing with one parent all of the time, maybe they practice with a different parent, or maybe you involve the siblings in the practice, or maybe they talk to their grandparent on their phone and they're using their sounds while they are talking to their grandparent. Or maybe when they visit the library, they try and ask for a certain book from the librarian using their clear sounds. So yeah, just trying to change up one aspect of it, whether it be the setting, the person, or the activity. So again, there's been lots of different activity ideas given. So maybe your child has a favorite game that they like to play. Try changing that game up, or try choosing a different type of game. Maybe they're always doing a game at the table. Maybe you try doing a movement game, or maybe you try doing a craft instead. Or if you've chosen a certain daily routine that you're practicing, like maybe you're practicing at bath time, maybe you add a different routine or change a routine. Like maybe instead of bath time, maybe you start in the car practicing. So yeah, just trying to change it up a bit so that they can get practice in those different settings with different people and help them be able to use it in all those different settings. As well, you want to be consistent with your practice. So some families might say, oh, let's just set this 1 hour and we can do this for an hour once a week. And that's our practice. And that's great. Any practice that you're doing is fantastic. For young kids, especially, the hour might be a long time. So maybe you can think about how can we do it every day just for a little bit. So maybe just instead of doing that hour, maybe we're doing it for 5 minutes every day. And then it can be something that they're staying consistent with and practicing every day. And that can also help just them to remember and use it in those everyday activities. Also, before practice, I mentioned this a few times, but just reminding your child that you'll be listening for their sound and to focus, like you want them to focus on using their clear sound. While they're practicing, you're modeling and emphasizing their target sound in your speech. If you are playing a game and say you're focusing on the word level, you can also take turns, maybe their word is see and they got to see something. You can also emphasize other sounds as they're playing, like, oh wow, I see the snake. I think this snake is slithering around or something like that. So you're kind of adding those extra models to increase their awareness, as well as that's a good way to see if they might copy you in some of those phrases or sentences. So it can kind of be that bridge between words and sentences if you're doing lots of modeling of words and phrases in whatever activity it is that you're practicing words in. It can, if you're modeling those sentences, it can help bridge that gap into practicing in phrases and sentences. Always also remembering to respond to their message and emphasize or repeat any missing sounds. They don't always have to stop and copy you. That can be frustrating for them. But that modeling that you do helps be that gentle reminder for like, oh yeah, I need to use my sound for that word, or oh yeah, that's how I say it. That's my sound. So that can be helpful as well. And always giving lots and lots of praise for using their sound and trying to keep it fun, because we know that if it's fun, then they'll be more likely to want to do it and want to practice and be able to be more consistent with it. So those are some tips. If you do have questions, you can feel free to reach out to me either via phone or email, as well as also you can reach out to your school SLP if you're wondering specific questions about what they're practicing at or where a good start would be for them to practice. So that's it for today, and thanks for joining.